Hey, Ryan, welcome.
Hey, hello. Good morning from North America. How are you today?
Yeah, very well. Joining from Berlin, Germany. And I guess welcome to what's new in Prisma 2.90.
Welcome, everyone. We are looking a bit different today. Nico is out today. He's on vacation right now. So we've got Daniel, and of course I'm here as well. So welcome to everyone to our Prisma 2.9 release live stream. So Daniel, what's going on in Berlin? Tell me about the situation there. Is it one thing I've wondered that I haven't really heard too much about from chatting with coworkers is like, what is it like going out into public right now? Is like everyone masked up? Are people respecting social distancing a lot in Berlin, or what's it like there?
I'd say it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, Germans are quite, respectful of rules, but Berlin seems to be quite an exception to that.
Hmm.
And so it's tightening up as numbers are spiking.
Got it. Yeah, I think here. So I'm in Canada. I'm in Ottawa. And people are pretty respectful of it. It's rare to see someone without a mask, especially if you go indoors. We've just had a new in Ontario, at least we've had a new like lockdown ish kind of thing. I think they call it back to stage 2 or whatever that we were at previously in the spring, where restaurants you cannot sit inside a restaurant now, and gyms are closed again. And there's something else too. There's a bunch of stuff that is basically closed down again, at least for the next 28 days or something like that.
Right.
Which seems like an arbitrary amount of time because I don't know. If we're going into the winter, I think it's just going to go beyond this. Like it's going to be into the spring, I think, at least until things come out of any kind of lockdown. At least that's what I expect.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, enough about coronavirus stuff. We have some great stuff to talk about today in Prisma 2.9. This release is maybe not one that has a lot of brand new shiny stuff for users to try out in terms of like new APIs and whatever, but there's a lot of bug fixes and a lot of improvements to the developer experience and laying some groundwork for stuff coming in the future. So I think you want to start talking about bug fixes. Maybe we can start there. We'll talk about some of the recent fixes that have gone in. What's this one about FindFirst that got fixed in this release?
Yeah, so FindFirst was, I think, introduced in the previous release, 2.8. And then the idea with FindFirst was that you could find the first result. So find the first result of a query on when you're searching for records that aren't necessarily unique. So we have the find one, but FindFirst is different in that it allows you to select the first of a search that doesn't include any unique constraints. And there, it's possible to also get a null result if no results match the query. And so there was a little change there, a fix there with that being, with the return value being possible to be null. And so that was fixed. And we also had something similar with the find one. And so this find one is the other one where it's the other sort of client API method where you can select one, you can find one record, one row in a database, but you can only use that, you can only filter that on columns that are unique. And so we had a little bug there with these unique indices in the client. And so that has also been resolved. I can also share the link to that. It was quite an edge case, but we had one of the community contributors, Emil, who also gave a talk at Prisma Day, report that, and that was quickly resolved.
Nice. Excellent. And yeah, what I'll do too is I'll put into the comments, I will put the link to the release notes. So this is the link to the release notes for Prisma 2.9. And you can take a look at all of the bug fixes that have been addressed there. One that came up that I saw prior to 2.9, did you see the news of DigitalOcean's new offering, their app? I don't even know what you would call it.
Yeah, the app platform.
Platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I gave that a spin. I don't know, last week, whenever it was released, maybe the day after. And I had a Prisma project that I tried to deploy to their app platform, and everything was working locally. But once it got to their platform, things broke, and I was getting some messages about Win32 or something like that. And I tracked it down, and it was an issue due to a node version. And the thing with the app platform, at least from what I could see, is I couldn't adjust my node version in DigitalOcean's app platform. I couldn't find a spot. I looked through all the settings, looked through everything that I possibly could, and I couldn't find a spot where I could adjust the version. And all that to say, there was a bug, Prisma and Node 12.19. So I'm going to link to this bug. If you have come across this, if anyone out there has been running into issues with this particular bug, it's issue 907. This is something that's been addressed now. And this is what I was running into with the app platform for DigitalOcean. And I couldn't find a way to adjust the node version. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. Maybe it's there somewhere, but I just could not figure it out. But regardless, it is fixed now for Prisma Client. So I don't know if you ran into that, Daniel, but that's something I was stumbling on last week.
Yeah, I think I ran into it with Heroku when I was doing some tests on Heroku. And with Heroku, you can actually, in your package JSON, you have this versions field where you can specify and so they actually respect that file and choose the node version based on it. And so you have some fine control, but I'm not so sure about the app platform. So far, I've had really nice experiences. I tried it during the beta testing period, and I've had it's really nice to have, an alternative to Heroku, and they also have a really nice Postgres offering.
Yep, totally. That's actually an interesting thing that maybe we could talk about for a sec is there's lots of options now when we want to find a spot to deploy an app to. So maybe let's think about the case of like a traditional long-running node server. You can do Heroku, and now the app platform with DigitalOcean. You could do something on AWS with Elastic Beanstalk. And there's tons of other hosting options too. What are some things that you think about or look for or you're mindful of when you're looking for a spot to deploy something to? Is there anything that you always want to have as a piece of value from a provider that you need to be there?
I think the database offering is probably the most important because most of the applications that I've built rely on some kind of database. And so having the database close to the app in terms of the network locality is really important to me. And then especially if they have Postgres and they have the managed offering of that with backups and so on, that kind of gives me the peace of mind.
Yeah.
So those are the main things, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and I mean, that's important for sure, database location. And I've used a whole range of them. I've used Heroku, I've used AWS quite extensively. Things like Heroku are nicer to use than AWS because you have a more managed experience. But with AWS, you've got more control. So I'm thinking back to times when I had to set up particular WAF rules for an application, so web application firewall rules. And with Heroku, you don't really have control over that. They'll give you some WAF stuff out of the box, as far as I know, to kind of to help against common attacks. But if you want to get fine-grained and do special things with the WAF, you can't really do that with Heroku. You could use something like Cloudflare and bring that in and have a WAF set up for your application. But AWS gives you that product right within their suite of products, which is nice to use, right?
Right.
So that's one reason that I might look to something like AWS. I like providers that give me good monitoring and good insights, and I mean that's often lacking with any of these providers. Often you have to go to a third-party solution for observability and metrics and stuff like that.
Yeah, New Relic and Datadog, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And Heroku, I like their dashboard, their metrics dashboard that you get out of the box. And AWS gives you something similar, but I found Heroku's to be a bit nicer to use. So I don't know. Cost is another thing too, right? You can get started for pretty cheap on Heroku. And I think what happens is you get started for pretty cheap on Heroku, but if you start to scale up quite a bit, it gets really expensive really quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas on AWS, when you start out, it's a bit more expensive than Heroku, but as you scale up, the costs do not go skyrocketing the same way they do on Heroku. At least that's what I've seen and what I've heard from others too. So I don't know, a bunch of different options, a bunch of different options out there, a bunch of different things to consider. And one thing that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is whether serverless is really a solution now to like these traditional backends. And I tweeted something like a survey the other day to see what people think. And there's it was pretty split in thirds between people who think that serverless is a full replacement, those who think it's not, and those who think it's just not ready yet for a full replacement. So I don't know. What do you think about serverless? What's your vote? Do you think it's like a full server replacement, or is not quite ready yet?
I don't think it's quite ready yet. I mean, you have to invest quite a lot into the whole ecosystem, and I think one of the biggest challenges with serverless has been like replicating the runtime on your local machine for testing purposes. And so the tooling is getting better. I remember hearing from one of the Azure developer advocates. She mentioned that their runtime for Azure for their serverless platform is completely open source, and so that you can run that on your machine, and essentially you're running it in the same environment as your production pipelines.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's the challenges with managing database connections and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big pain point, is the database connection. And like everyone that I talk to has the same thing, same pain point, and so if you're thinking about this from a Prisma perspective, and we've got some demos and some examples that we're actually going to get into a little bit later to show things with like NextJS. So it's kind of relevant here, but the Prisma deployment strategy to serverless, can be kind of straightforward, like any database would be on the surface. But then there are some things that you've got to manage in a serverless environment that maybe require some more work. So like if you're wanting to manage these database connections, you have to get something like PG Bouncer into the mix, or if you're on AWS, you can use this like RDS proxy tool they have to pool connections. But all that to say, like if you're using Prisma, or if you're using just standard database connections, you're going to run into these connection issues quite often, which can be a pain to deal with serverless. There are ways around it, but often it's a bit more overhead than you would have with a traditional server. So that's something that's a pain point, I think, and maybe a reason why serverless isn't quite ready to be a full replacement, at least in my opinion. So we digressed. I took us on a digression there quite a bit. My apologies. But let's get back on track. Let's talk about, maybe we can move into the error reporting improvements, especially with Prisma $dollar transaction. What's this one all about, Daniel?
Yeah, so I should probably preface this by saying that, one of the core goals behind Prisma is, improving confidence and increasing productivity. And sometimes, increasing productivity can come down to a more informative error message. And so already with the rich type system in Prisma Client, you get a lot of help with the auto-completion. And, if you have any type errors, you'll get quite rich errors. But now we're sort of extending that and really trying to put attention to a lot of the errors that are thrown. And so, for example, right now, when you use this Prisma transaction method of the Prisma Client API, which allows you to essentially group a bunch of queries into a single transaction, if you would await the Prisma calls and then pass them into the Prisma transaction call, you would get an error. And what we're doing now is we're actually giving a much more insightful error, where we actually say, if you're awaiting those calls prior, you shouldn't. You should actually just pass the calls, and then the Prisma transaction will actually do the await on them.
Yeah, the transaction itself takes care of the asynchrony in those calls. So that's made more clear now with this improved error messaging. Was there something else on error messaging too that got improved? I want to go back to the release notes too.
Yeah. So we're now whenever an error is thrown from Prisma Client, we actually include the client version as a field on the. So basically that error extends the native JavaScript error type,
right?
And it adds this client version field, and that really just helps us. Helps users in terms of debugging, making sure that they're running the correct version. like if they've upgraded but haven't necessarily generated their client again. And so now they get this client version, and it's a really quick indication to make sure you're running the correct version. And it's also useful. I mean, if you actually discover a bug and you want to report it, it's
Very
sort
cool.
of right in there.
And I guess on that note, maybe slightly related, is a friendly reminder that probably the best way, and the way that we recommend to manage your Prisma versions, is for each project that you have, to install the Prisma stuff you need local to that project. So instead of installing the Prisma CLI globally and then using that all across your machine, we recommend instead you put it into each individual project as a dev dependency, and then you can run npx Prisma whatever, and that's going to look into your dev dependencies or your regular dependencies, and you use it from there, and as opposed to a global installation. And that way you're going to have there'd be much less opportunity for you to have like these version conflicts across your client and your CLI and everything like that. So yeah, that's probably the best way to go about managing your CLI and getting a good path with versions. So there's better error reporting. There's also some groundwork that we're laying for native database types, and this is something that I'm super interested in, because one thing that I was, I guess, a little bit surprised when I started up was that there wasn't really a way to specify like how long, how many characters a field should be. Like if you have a string or a varchar or whatever, and you want to specify like the length of it in your database, not a way to do that right now. There's some defaults that are set at the Prisma level, but not a way to be specific. So let's talk about native database types. Maybe what is the problem? Why can't we just specify the length of a field right now? Like, why can't that be applied to every database that we use?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the core ideas with Prisma is to support multiple relational databases. And because, I mean, even if you just look at MySQL and Postgres, they differ quite a lot in a lot of the fields and a lot of the sort of data types that they use. So, for example, a text field in Postgres, you can set a unique constraint on that. But in MySQL, you can't actually do that. And so one of the goals with Prisma is to make it easy to use multiple databases, multiple database types. And for that, we have to sort of create some kind of mapping. And so far, we haven't sort of given that control to users to control the underlying database type when they're using Prisma Migrate. I should mention that it was supported in many cases if you're introspecting an existing database. And so we have this mapping, right? So if you have a string in your Prisma schema, that will map to a varchar in MySQL, but in Postgres, it'll map to a text field. And so right now, when we speak about this groundwork for native database types, a lot of the work being done is about providing a way to users to explicitly choose this underlying column type. And this is a challenge because this affects the implementation, will actually affect how Prisma Migrate works, and also Prisma Client. So for example, if you wanted to use the big int type to represent really large integers, I think the big int uses 8 bytes. So, I mean, you have a much bigger spectrum of integers that you can represent.
Right.
And you want to query that in Prisma Client, you need to find some kind of representation for that in JavaScript, because the number type in JavaScript is constrained and it can't represent some of the numbers that are big int. And so the good news is that the ECMAScript 2020 standard has introduced a native big int type. And so a lot of the work that's being done now is exactly doing those kind of mappings. So first of all, allowing users to specify in their Prisma schema the kind of native data type that they want to use, specific to their database. And then the second aspect of that is also how do you actually represent that in your application runtime when you're using Prisma Client.
Right.
And so we have a big epic for this, an issue on GitHub, and I can share the link, and
Yeah.
it's really useful. I mean, if you're waiting for a if you're waiting for a specific version, a specific type, then it's good to sort of share your experience and sort of leave a comment on that field. On that issue.
Cool. I think I see the link to Notion in the.
Yeah, I think that was the wrong link. I'm just removing that, and I will put the link to the GitHub issue.
Cool,
and so
thanks.
if there's a specific type that you're looking for, check out this issue that I just shared, and yeah, leave your comment.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's quite the requested feature for sure. There's you know, I know that a lot of people are looking for this. In particular, when I was doing the Redwood meetup, so Redwood JS, they're a group that's particularly interested in having this feature land. So it is coming. There's work being done. It's quite a large undertaking, and it's on its way. So stay tuned for that. Is there anything else from the release that is worth mentioning, like to pull out? I mean, there's a whole list of issues that were closed with the release, you know, across like Prisma, the client, Studio, Engine, like everything. Anything that comes to mind for you as something that's worth diving into a bit more?
So also we had Prisma Studio, we released that, and that's now sort of generally available. And there were a bunch of small bugs there that were fixed that are probably worth mentioning. And so if you want to try it out and you already have a project, it's as simple as running npx space Prisma space Studio. Check it out. It's really getting more and more polished over time. And besides that, it's probably worth mentioning that we've had these preview features, the atomic number operations, connector create, and this transaction API. And so if you haven't given those a go and you need those kind of features, I'd definitely recommend checking those out.
Yeah, totally. Yep, thank you. Yeah, so again, not a lot of like shiny new APIs to use in this release, but a lot of ergonomics that have been improved upon. Yeah, I think developers will benefit from the better error messages and obviously the bug fixes. And as a reminder, the cadence that we've got is a bi-weekly release schedule. So, you know, we've been pretty good about that since releasing 2.0. It's, you know, every 2 weeks there's a new release out, and you can expect new features to land as we come. But sometimes it is more so on the bug fixes to set ourselves up for great new features in the future. So with that, why don't we talk about some community stuff? Do we want to dive into the JSON schema generator? Is that where we should go next?
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting.
All right. So something that I wanted to ask you, though, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. I think we're good here, hey?
Yeah, I'm going to change the...
Thank you. Awesome. JSON schema. What do you know about JSON schema? Because I don't know a lot. It's something that I've heard about over and over and over again. And I think I've read this page a bunch of times, but I don't know that I know what it's for. Do you have a good description of, like, a good succinct kind of description of what it's all about, what it's for?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, JSON schema is a way to sort of describe how you expect a certain schema, a certain JSON object to look like. And it's interesting because, as I believe, you describe the shape of a JSON, you describe the schema with JSON. And so it's a JSON file that represents what you expect other JSON objects to look like.
Very meta.
Yeah. And so I believe this was sort of conceived as some kind of like a standard, because JSON has become this standard way of exchanging data between platforms. And I think REST APIs didn't have a really standard way of describing what's the shape of JSON that they expect or that they return.
So would you use this if you're building an API, like a JSON API, and you're expecting like a payload to come in a certain shape, is this what you would use? Could you use JSON schema to validate a payload? Okay.
So essentially you would write some JSON file that describes what's the shape that you're expecting as the input. And so if this was to register a user and you expect a user name, an email, a first name, and a password, then, you know, you could describe that using this JSON schema specification, and then you could pass that into a validation library, which would then take the schema and then the incoming payload and then sort of verify that and give you an error if it doesn't match the schema.
Okay. Yeah, I've never really used this. I've used, and it's a framework that you know well, Happy.js. They've got a great library in that community for validation. Joy is excellent for validating payloads. That's what I've typically, even when I'm building an Express API, actually, I'll use the Joy library and still use it for validation. And then if I'm doing stuff on the front end, it's what's the one that's based on Joy? It's called Yup, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yup. It goes along well with Formic if you're building a React application and you need a forms library. Formic is very good, and Yup goes along with it very nicely for validation. So I've never really used JSON schema, but people use it. That's probably a true statement, I would say. And there is this community project called Prisma JSON Schema Generator, which gives you a JSON schema file. So I figured we will just demo this. This is like the third or fourth generator that we've demoed in recent times. So community projects often come down to being generators, which is really cool. I mean, it shows the power of Prisma being this platform that you can sort of like extend upon. And the generators are a really cool implementation of that. So let's check it out. Let's grab this. Instead of typing this out, I'm just going to grab it from here. I have this project here that I used last time for this DBML generator. It's up here. Here's in my schema.prisma file, the DBML generator, and the provider is Prisma DBML generator. After I run Prisma generate, I get this schema.dbml. Database markup language gives you a database diagram from your schema. So the goal now is to get a JSON schema file from the same schema that we've got. It's got like a user, post, contact, just a bunch of random stuff. So let's see how to do that. So I installed it. It was npm install Prisma JSON schema generator. And let's see what we got to put in. So we do that, we install it, and then we add the generator. And this one, it's interesting because in the other generators that we've used, so I'll pop this up here. In the other generators that we've used, it points the provider to the name of the generator. But I noticed in this one, it's pointing the provider to, I guess, a command, right? Node.
Yeah,
module.
it seems so.
Yeah, it's pointing to like this node command, which goes into node modules into Prisma JSON schema generator. So a bit different in the way that the provider wires up, I guess, but I'm sure doing the same thing under the hood. I haven't looked under the hood for this one, but likely what it's using is the DMMF from Prisma, the data model meta format, maybe. Yeah. Okay. I've messed that acronym up a number of times, but I think I got it. So it uses that. That's a way to get all of the information out of your schema essentially, and then do what you want with it. So if that's in place, why don't we see if this will work? We can do npx prisma generate. And once we do, we got this new folder, JSON-schema, and we've got this JSON file, which has definitions. And here it is. It's like the shape of the schema, right? So user example, this is right here, my model called user example. And we have given it a type of object with properties, by their names, ID, email, name, and it's like meta information about those things. So there's
it's nice
that.
It's even taking the fact that the name field on the first one that you had there is optional. by showing that it can be either string or null.
There it is. Yeah, types is an array in this case, and the options are there, string or null. What do we get? So yeah, in the other ones, type points to a string as opposed to an array, because this one is not nullable. Cool. Well, there's that. So, I mean, where would we use this? That's what I was kind of left wondering is like, when would we go and where would we put this now that we've got it?
I mean, if you were building, say, a REST API, what you could do is, and assuming that REST API is backed by a Prisma client and a database, what you could do is you could actually use this to validate incoming input
Right.
before passing it to the Prisma client call. So you could just import that and then validate the fields.
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of brings up, it made me think about this whole argument as to whether your database should be exposed as an API. You know, you've heard this one, right? Like,
Yeah.
Many people say, and I think there's a lot of merit to this. I think there's a lot of truth to this, is that your database shape, your database model really should be a detail that your backend is concerned about and isn't exposed via a public API. The public API that you expose should be restrictive and should limit what's accessed and what's available for input, I guess I would say, at your database. And so you should take in inputs and make and validate them and all that, and then put them into your database, as opposed to exposing your database as an API out of the box. And I think that's a lot of the people run into pain points with some of these kinds of like services and some of these libraries that expose the database directly as an API. One concrete example that we can think of is like, if you have a user model, you've got a password on that user model, you don't want to expose that to your API. So you can restrict that by doing some workarounds and stuff like that. But sometimes, these things that make your database accessible directly via an API can be a little bit cumbersome. And anyway, that just made me think of that whole issue when I
absolutely. I think that's really worth mentioning. I guess it sort of defeats the whole point of the API being some kind of abstraction layer over your database.
Yeah, but obviously it can be powerful if that's what your use case is, can use. So there's merit to it for sure. Absolutely. I'm going to stop sharing screen now, and I will move it here. Why don't you pop in, Daniel, and we can talk about the visual regression tracker.
Yes, so let me just share my screen. We just recently came across one of these community projects that makes use of Prisma. And this one is a visual regression tracker. So the idea behind it, as I understand it, is that the service receives images, performs pixel by pixel comparison with its previously accepted baseline, and then provides immediate results in order to catch unexpected changes in those pixels. So this is a very common technique of discovering visual regressions when you're sort of doing continuous delivery and you're constantly deploying versions of your front end, and you might want to have one of these visual regression trackers that sort of takes a snapshot of your page and then alerts you whenever there is a change in the design or something like that. And so this was built with Prisma, and you can see that here. So I think the creator is using NextJS and then Prisma here. Yeah, there we go. We have Prisma client here, and let's check out the schema for this project. I'm actually quite curious to see. So there's a build model.
Can you bump the size there a bit?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing. Yeah, so we have this build model here, which has some relation to test runs and then a project. So a project can have multiple builds, and then each one of those builds can have multiple test runs. I really like, exploring schemas with the Prisma schema is quite a nice way to get an idea of what this project is doing. Okay, and then we have these test variations. and each test variation can have multiple test runs in the baselines. Okay, so there's quite a few models here and fair number of relations. And so here, yeah, this is a great example of, what we mentioned before with the password field in the user model. And he's also using a test status enum here.
Where does that get applied, the enums? I haven't really worked with those yet in Prisma.
Yeah, I think so. For example, if you have user types, for example, and you don't want to use a different, if you don't want to use a different table to store the user types with like a foreign key, then you can just have a like user type field that would point to a user type enum, and then you could always add also. So you could have a user admin, super admin, Superman, and whatnot.
Yeah. And so that really, I suppose, just makes it such that your Prisma client restricts you from using something that's not in the enum. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's the idea. And in fact, you can also import the constants from Prisma client. But also if you're using VS Code, you'll get auto-completion. And so if you have an enum type in your Prisma schema, the Prisma client will actually help you with the auto-completion and give you all of those enums. And so in this case, you would have, like, as you're sort of typing along in the Prisma client, the auto-completion will show each one of these as an option.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's powerful. And so that's super useful because, like, for certain things, you don't need to keep a whole table just for like like constants or enums or whatever, what have you, right? You might want to just rely on your VS Code IDE to help you put the right values in. And I suppose the idea would be, like, if you went into the database, you could stuff in a value that would be some other value that's not in your enum, but the Prisma client's not going to let you do that when you're going through the client itself.
That's a good question. I don't actually remember right now, but I think in some database, we can actually look in the docs. So we have this mapping, essentially, but I do believe that in some databases you can. Yeah, so for example, the enum type in Postgres. So what I'm looking now is I'm looking at the type mappings between Postgres and the Prisma schema.
Right.
And this is a really useful page, also in the context we spoke about native database types. So this really explains what the type in the Prisma schema will map to in Postgres. And so here, for example, the enum type in Postgres will also map to the enum. So I believe that will be enforced on the database.
Interesting. Layer. Okay, so there's like a database level enforcement.
Yeah,
that's cool. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so that was an interesting project. I'll share the link to the visual regression. Sorry, I have so many tabs open here.
Thank you. One thing that I really love about Prisma schemas is it's similar to how when I first started using GraphQL and I was writing like the schemas with the schema definition language. One thing that came to mind for me is that it's such an expressive way of describing the shape of your API that's consumable in basically, a very small amount of space. And you can, if someone else knows how to read schema definition language, you can communicate about what the shape of your API is and talk about it together in a very succinct way that's like, but still communicates a lot of information. And I think the same thing is true about the Prisma schema. It's like, cruising through an open source project that we haven't been looking at before, it's really easy to get a grasp on what's going on for the data model just by browsing this file. Like if you know how to read Prisma schemas, it's you browse through this and you've got a really good idea already, as opposed to looking through database diagrams and looking where the relations are and all this stuff, which is useful too. And maybe, people like to consume information in different ways, but I find this style of thing to be really good at describing something with very little space. I don't know if you find the same.
Yeah, I absolutely share that view, and I think I was sort of struck by the same insight when I got started with GraphQL. It's
Yeah.
just it was a really nice way to see what's coming. I mean, I think we're having worked with REST APIs, sometimes it's like a mystery what you're going to get back, and sort of having this concise description is a really helpful.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay. So anything else to say on the regression tracker, or should
No,
we move along?
I'll share a link to that
Cool.
in the chat. So that was that. Okay, so I've shared a link to that, and maybe this is a good moment to mention that we have a Prisma online meetup.
Yes.
And so you can subscribe to that. I'll share a link, but you can go to meetup.com, and we also have a link to the YouTube event. And so you can also set a reminder in YouTube. So I'll share a link to that. And the idea with this meetup is that we're inviting engineers from all over the globe to learn more about database best practices, the Prisma Inside Scoop, and examples of Prisma in production. And so this will take place on October the 27th at 6 p.m. Central European Time. And we have 3 speakers. We have 2 who are confirmed, and the third will probably be a surprise. And so the first one is Tammy Bryant, who's a principal site reliability engineer at Gremlin, and she will tell us some database horror stories. Then following her, we'll have Hervé Labas, who's our VP of product, who'll be talking about the future of Prisma and the roadmap. Also, a quick reminder that you can find the roadmap at pris.ly/roadmap. And so I will share a link to that in the comments too. And so we have these 2 speakers. And yeah, I think it's going to be a fun event.
Yeah, that'll be great. I'm looking forward to the database horror stories talk, especially. I've had some horror stories of my own in the past, and so it'll be nice at least to hear that other people have gone through hopefully similar things, and I'm not alone.
Oh yeah, yeah. I recently saw this hilarious meme. I don't know if you've seen it, where if the coffee doesn't wake you up in the morning, try deleting one of the production databases.
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's funny. I didn't
yeah.
see that one, but that is true. That would be very true. Cool. Let's move on to examples. You wanted to show an example of something with TypeScript and GraphQL and Next.js.
Yes, so this is a quick reminder that we have this Prisma examples repo, which has quite a lot of ready-to-run examples. And what I wanted to show is I wanted to show one of the TypeScript full stack examples that makes use of Next.js with GraphQL. And so the idea here in this project is that there is obviously a Prisma schema, and this is just using a simple sort of blog kind of thing where you have a user model and a post model. But what's really interesting is that the API, so Next.js has this concept of these API routes where you essentially can define these asynchronous handlers that you can call from your app. And so here what we have is we have a Apollo server that is serving a GraphQL API that is backed by Prisma. And so here, for example, we have this user type, and here we have the resolver for it. And so it returns, in this one, it returns the posts associated with a user. And then similarly, here we have the author resolver for a post. And so this will return the associated author. And this is using just Apollo server along with Prisma client. And I can also show it because I have it running locally. So I will open that up. And so here I can go and I can sign up, or I'll sign up in your name. and that creates the user. Now I can create a draft, and here I can add that. And I'll open up the inspector here. So network, I'll make this also a bit bigger so you can see the GraphQL request going through. And so here we have this API call, a post API call, which is calling this create draft mutation with the information that we passed. And that sort of maps to, in our resolvers, where are the mutations? And so here we have this create draft. And so really what we're seeing is sort of loading the page, and then from that page an asynchronous request is made using the GraphQL client. So I believe on the client it's also using Apollo client. Yes. So it's using Apollo client here in order to make a call to that create draft mutation. And on the topic of Next.js, I should mention that we have this page which describes all of the different ways that you can integrate Prisma and Next.js. And so some of you may be familiar with this concept of static site generation, and the fact that Next.js actually supports a bunch of different sort of paradigms for fetching data. So you have this static site generation, you also have server-side rendering, and then you also have these API routes. And so the example that I just showcased makes use of these API routes. And in this example, we really just had one route, which was serving the full GraphQL API.
Very cool. Yeah, and there's a couple of like different ways that I've seen people do GraphQL with Next. Like you can create sort of a higher order component, like a with Apollo component if you're using Apollo client. I don't know if you've seen that one or if you have any opinions on like what's the best way to integrate like a GraphQL client to a Next project.
Yeah, I've heard. So there's, is it SWR, and there's also GQL.
Yeah.
But no, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't explored it in depth enough, but like one of the issues that you run into when you're building a Next.js app and you're calling a GraphQL backend, especially if you're wanting to do server-side rendering, is that the call to your GraphQL API, if you're doing it through the get server-side props function, that's going to happen. That's like a server-side thing that's happening. So the Apollo client that you would typically use in your front end that is concerned with your React application isn't really applicable to that spot in the same way. So what you might do is you might use something like the GraphQL request library, which is a really small library to just where you provide an endpoint basically, and then a GraphQL document, and it will do the request for you. So you can do that, but the problem is if you get your data initially via that route through GraphQL request, then you're in this spot where when you want to maybe update your data later, you don't have the same stuff in the cache, the Apollo cache that you would need to like update your local cache. So what people do is they come up with like a wrapper for Apollo that can be used from server-side rendering and plug into that. It gets a little bit complex. So I don't know if like I've found an approach that's really clean, really easy to use, but there's different options. Anyway, it's just some stuff to keep in mind when you're doing server-side rendering. Not just Next.js, it would be applicable to anything, any environment that you're doing SSR with.
In the example that you gave, would you be calling the GraphQL API on the server side while you're doing the server side rendering? Is that the rough idea?
Yeah. At least that's one way to do it. I mean, there are maybe better ways to do it, but yeah, like you'd run your get server side props or whatever that function is called. I think that's the name.
Yeah, get server side props.
Yeah.
I guess in this example that we have on this page, we completely skip the whole GraphQL layer and just go directly to the database. But you could just fetch from a GraphQL API.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and yeah, the issue is that like your typical Apollo stuff that you'd have in your React application can't be used in that get server side props function, since it's like a backend thing. So then you need something that runs a node to make a request to your GraphQL API. But then your data isn't in the Apollo cache, and maybe there's something you can do to stick it into the Apollo cache after you've hydrated. I don't know. But in any case, there's a bit of a workaround that you have to do, at least from what I found.
Cool. So we're just about to wrap up.
Yep.
And on that note, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, so many of you have been asking about what's happening, when is Prisma Migrate coming? And as you might know from the roadmap, we're actively working on this. And so we're seeking users who are interested in trying out upcoming versions of Prisma Migrate. And this will involve trying it out, validating the functionality, and sharing feedback with us. And so if you are interested in participating, I will also share a link to a quick form. It will take you under a minute to fill it out. And if you fill it out, we might reach out and ask you to participate in this. And so I just shared the link. And yeah, and on that note, I think we can wrap up. Do you have anything else to share, Ryan?
I don't think so. I am looking forward to seeing what's coming with Migrate. I know it's one of the kind of last things to put in, to take off the experimental flag, and then we'll be really well rounded with everything being stable. So I'm really curious to see what's coming. Yeah, I'm excited.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you for tuning in, to all of you who tuned in from wherever you are. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Ciao, Ryan.